mana-mana syarikat ataupun perniagaan boleh je identify if ada jawatan yang boleh dipegang oleh OKU.
I believe dalam semua syarikat pada hari inilah mesti ada at least salah seorang dalam your team yang ada family member ke, anak ke, someone they know who is neurodivergent.
We are trying to be more inclusive, right? We are trying to make some of these accommodations and changes at our workplace, so that we can have, more diversity in another way.
Yeah.
Hai, Assalamualaikum. Selamat kembali ke podcast Kita Family. Sekarang ini kita bersama-sama dalam episod yang ke-27. Di Kita Family, kami membincangkan perihal yang berkaitan makna serta kepentingan hidup masyarakat, menghargai perbezaan sesama kita, sama ada daripada keturunan, kaum, latar belakang, dan sudah tentu juga dari segi agama, kepercayaan. Dan for us, of course, focus is always on keupayaan kita menghargai hidup bermasyarakat di mana kepentingan segenap lapisan masyarakat dan semua di antara kita akan diambil kira kepentingannya. Lebih lagi mereka yang berkelainan atau kurang upaya. So today kita ingin membincangkan satu topik yang agak penting dan kita mengharapkan juga topik yang agak praktikal, ya. Kerana hari ini kita akan membincangkan penyesuaian ataupun reasonable accommodation, penyesuaian yang dapat dilakukan di tempat-tempat kerja. Pada episod yang ke-25 kalau tak silap saya, kami di Kita Family telah membuka topik tentang penyesuaian di tempat-tempat belajar. And today we're going to talk about the workplace.
Yep.
Yeah. How we can make things better. Apakah yang dapat kita lakukan sebagai majikan terutamanya, dan di apa jua tempat kerja pun, sama ada mungkin sebuah syarikat ataupun bila kita menyebut tentang suasana pekerjaan, sama ada di office ataupun di tempat-tempat lain, bergantung kepada industri pekerjaan. Apakah antara yang dapat dilakukan untuk membolehkan mereka yang OKU, warga OKU ataupun yang neurodivergent turut boleh bekerja di tempat-tempat ini, ya. So for example, kalau kita melihat dari segi statistik dengan data, pada tahap persekolahan, especially pada tahun-tahun pendidikan formal, ya, up to sekolah menengah terutamanya, mungkin masih ada lagi peluang untuk mereka yang OKU dan neurodivergent untuk mendapatkan pembelajaran. But it's not the same when it's time to go out to the workplace. So sebagai contoh, ada kalau di Malaysia, kerajaan telah menetapkan sasaran sejak 1988 lagi, ya, bahawa kita memerlukan atau kita harus memastikan 1%. And when I say 1% pun I feel a bit like 1% je. But anyway, 1% penjawat awam adalah di antara golongan OKU. And that was back in 1988. Okay, so that was like a different century even. And why am I saying that and half laughing and half macam tak tahulah apa nak kata sebenarnya. Sebab sampai sekarang ni pun kita belum mencapai target kita yang 1%. 1% and we haven't made it happen.
And that is just dalam agensi kerajaan, bukan di
sektor swasta.
Dan tapi kita selalunya melihat kepada kerajaan untuk lead the way lah. Kan?
Yes.
Menunjukkan teladan sebagai contoh and all that. Of course, sometimes I think sektor swasta akan menunjukkan kepimpinan. There's certain leadership in certain areas. What I'm saying is when we talk about things like this, we talk about employment policies, especially untuk golongan yang memerlukan, memang kita akan merujuk kepada kerajaan lah. So there's a lot of things to talk about. Let's jump into it. I think kalau boleh untuk segmen pertama kita, kalau kita boleh menyebut tentang apa yang dapat kita lakukan secara agak mudah tanpa kena bawa masuk konsultan, perbelanjaan yang terlalu tinggi, ataupun mungkin ada syarikat-syarikat tertentu kata mungkin kita tak mampulah, atau dia fikirkan benda ni terlalu rumit ke, teknikal ke. Tidak. I think we do want to share. Boleh saja kalau kita nak buat sendiri. Let's we could start today. You can have a conversation with HR or whoever is handling with it, and let's see what are some of the things that we can do. Yeah. Oh my goodness, I forgot to say siapa dalam studio today. Tengok, itulah kalau tak moderate.
Tapi semua dah kenal kan?
Yes. So
semua
I
dah
have
kenal.
Andin
Hai.
and Desiree.
Hello.
Kita bertiga je hari ni. Kakak kita tak dapat bersama, dan Didi dari KK pun tak dapat bersama-sama dengan kami pada hari ni. So kami bertiga je lah today. But of course, as always, they've given their input. So let's start the conversation going. Silakan Andin.
Pada saya, mana-mana syarikat ataupun perniagaan boleh je identify if ada jawatan yang boleh dipegang oleh OKU. Kita perlu prihatin sikit lah, especially kepada yang neurodivergent, that mereka mungkin tidak dapat menjalankan semua tugas. Tetapi ada tugas-tugas macam data entry yang tidak mempunyai deadline yang sangat ketat, dan menjadi receptionist, ataupun menjadi file searcher, ataupun menjadi tukang arrange store, ke benda-benda macam tu yang memang boleh orang-orang neurodivergent lakukan. Sebab satu ciri-ciri neurodiversity yang saya selalu tengok is eye to detail. Yang kalau suruh mereka susun buku itu seperti di perpustakaan, mereka akan buat sampai berbaris dengan prihatin, dengan sangat teliti until it looks perfect. So if you consider, like if you have a library, or you have even an area which you want to turn into a book corner, these are things that the neurodivergent individuals will be able to help with. They will be able to clock in, clock out, count the number of books at the start or at the end. So jobs like that are definitely something that can be considered. So if you are in packing, if you know things like packing, things like gift shops and things like that, if you can find a little job like stacking and packing, that is just one opening, and they may surprise you. And if we look at foreign countries, actually, some of them use them for very precise work, things that need to be done at a certain time in a certain way, because neurodivergent individuals can be trained, and they can be trained to do things. So what is really required is the will, the investment of time, and the investment of I want to do this, to give them a chance. Sebab mereka pun berhak untuk berdikari, untuk mempunyai pendapatan, and untuk rasa bahawa they can give back to society.
Okay, so that is one aspect, ataupun ini antara contoh pekerjaan yang mungkin tidak memerlukan kemahiran atau tahap pendidikan yang terlalu tinggi. Right?
Tapi ada
the qualification is not something that is mungkin akan jadi suatu kekangan lah terhadap mereka untuk mendapatkan kerja. But I think what is also interesting is that if we look at and we consider neurodivergent people with or without disabilities, ada berbagai jenis manusia we're talking about, right?
Betul.
So that is on one end of it. But can you say something also about people with really high and technical skills and things like that? And so one, as you said, untuk memberi peluang, kan, yang kita memikirkan apakah antara pekerjaan yang mungkin di syarikat saya, organisasi saya yang dapat satu jawatan ke jenis kerja yang boleh saya tawarkan kepada individu seperti ini. But what about on the higher end, more technical, or like other types of jobs? What does it take then?
Okay. Before we move on to the higher end, I just want to pick up from what you said, Nori. Sebab kepada yang pergi kepada mendapatkan inclusive education or SEN education in Malaysia, education ends at the age of 18 in Malaysia. So, after that, there is a gap. And we have to actually look at whether there is a bridge to preparing such individuals for the employment market. I feel there is that bridge that we need to discuss. But there are others, like you said, who sail through school, who just do so well in school. They may have some quirks and they may be neurodivergent, tetapi every single exam they pass or they meet the qualifications. But when it comes to workplace, they need more accommodation and reasonable accommodation. Why? Because they need to get used to a new routine. Unfortunately, in a lot of workplaces, routine is not the done thing, especially in the higher end. Every day is different. You have to deal with people. There are problems to solve every day. There can be a very kecoh kind of day in the workplace, or there can be a quiet day. So nothing is according to routine, and that's what they may struggle with. So they may not struggle with the work per se. So if let's say you take them as a research assistant, they will do really well because you give them the flexibility, the research, you give them a deadline, and if they can't meet the deadline, they come back to you, and that sort of work they are very, very good at. But work that then says, okay, now that you've got the research done, you need to present it, is the accommodation that is required, because they may not be able to stand up and present or memberi pertuturan yang lancar ataupun berdiri di hadapan 100 orang untuk memberikan taklimat berkenaan apa yang mereka telah teliti dan membuat kajian. And that is accommodation that you have as an employer. You can look and say, this is their skill set. Let's keep it to them. Speak to them to say, are you okay if then your research is shared and someone else presents it? Because you also have to look out for the fact that it is their work. Right? And you can't take that away from them.
So in this case, sorry, mencelah sedikit, penyesuaian terhadap their job scope. Right? So meaning that if as a researcher, you have to do all these 10 things. And the 10th thing is to present in front of a group of 100 people. So a reasonable accommodation would be to remove that or maybe replace it. We're not saying completely lower the bar for them. No, we are saying make an accommodation, maybe replace it with something else.
No,
right?
or you can record
KPI.
your presentation. It doesn't have to be live. Sebagai
Exactly.
contoh lah,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So there are things like that, which is like adjustment to routine. And how about speak about the physical environments that are sometimes, bagaimana kalau kita boleh menyebut tentang apakah yang dapat kita lakukan untuk, memudahkan atau menyediakan suatu suasana atau apa-apalah like secara fizikal or something. What else is there that's needed that prevents it? Because Ani dah sebut kata Kadang sebenarnya bukan kemahiran yang menjadi masalah. Bukan sama ada dia dapat membuat kerja tu yang tersebut. Tapi kenapa masih ramai tidak dapat bekerja, ataupun dapat peluang pekerjaan tapi tak bertahan lama sebagai contoh, right? So what is it that's going on and apakah yang perlu kita lakukan lah. So what is the accommodation at the workplace that we are talking about?
Saya rasa kadang-kala pendapat saya lah, is the fear of the unknown untuk majikan kadang-kadang before they want to make the necessary accommodations.
Okay.
So that's one thing I think we want to acknowledge, fear of the unknown. So that's why we're discussing it today. So hopefully some majikan who's thinking about it takes it a step further. Penyesuaian dari segi fizikal for those who are neurodivergent, sebenarnya pada saya taklah susah sangat. It can be as simple as adjusting the lighting, kan?
Okay.
Or berikan a quieter corner compared to your other people. Then saya rasa dalam banyak bangunan korporat sekarang ni, they have a room for breastfeeding, kan? Why not have a quiet room as well?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that is things, and in big buildings, kalau bangunan besar memang ada banyak space, right? You don't need a big space for it. An existing space, coordinate off, bolehlah jadi satu tempat that is calming area, kan? And at the end of the day, penyesuaian ni sebenarnya khusus terhadap individu tersebut. So it actually goes back to your interview process. Dalam interview tersebut, bila berjumpa,
kena ada penyesuaian lah
juga,
sebenarnya, kan?
yes.
If possible, yes.
Betul,
Right.
interview juga kena ada penyesuaian, and dalam interview tersebut tanyalah kepada individu tersebut, because like we always say, nothing with us without us, kan, for the community. So
So what is it? What do
tanya
you
terus,
need?
tanya
if
terus,
you are going
what
to
do you need?
come on
And
board?
I believe dalam semua syarikat pada hari inilah, mesti ada at least salah seorang dalam your team yang ada family member ke, anak ke, someone they know who is neurodivergent. Boleh juga tanya orang tersebut. How can we make this interview more inclusive for someone who's neurodivergent? And chances are, even if that person doesn't know firsthand, they will say, "Hey, I because I know someone, let me help you get the information."
Okay.
So I like what Desiree has said about putting a quiet corner, because actually all it takes is to buy a tent.
Yep.
No, seriously.
Yeah. It
just
could be as simple as
as
that.
a tent.
Bergantung
Yes.
kepada tempat kerja. Yalah, kalau company dia kecil atau whatever, it might be something like that, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or to allow them to have, some of them may like a cubicle and others may not like it. Some may feel very claustrophobic in a cubicle.
Yeah.
So if they come up and say, is it okay if I don't sit in a cubicle? Is it okay if I have my headphones on because I relax with music and I work better with music? Those are the kind of accommodations that you really have to just consider. Because as long as the work gets done, I don't see how making such reasonable accommodations or penyesuaian yang munasabah akan menjadi masalah ataupun cost the employer.
Yang tinggi, ya.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything more?
Dalam senarai yang kita nak sebut ni, boleh juga kita tambah yang mungkin sekarang ni kita dah sangat biasalah dengan situasi ni, terutama dalam hidup pasca COVID ni, kan. Flexible working hours, sebagai contoh, kan, flexibility. Dan mungkin di dalam hari pekerjaan tu, maybe it's not like so rigid. Lunch break cuma pada waktu ni dengan waktu ni sahaja. Break macam sini, things like that, right? Like maybe there can be more flexibility of how often you take a break, and also the other thing is the working remotely.
Yes.
I know so many companies, lepas kita dah tamat keadaan PKP, kita tidak lagi perlu atas dasar kuarantin kerja dari rumah sebagai contoh. Bila dunia dah kononnya kembali kepada satu keadaan yang lebih normal, I think many companies continue to say no, it's okay. Kan, memang ramai orang diberi peluang untuk teruskan bekerja remote ya, dari rumah atau dari tempat mana-mana pun. Dan I think we've acknowledged that way of working as something that is many people do, and that's nothing to do with penyesuaian kepada yang memerlukan.
Betul.
Dari segi keupayaan, right? Ini diberi kepada semua. So some of these things also is again antara yang bagus kan untuk mereka yang you dan neurodivergent, kalau tugas mereka boleh disiapkan dalam keadaan yang tidak terlalu how do I say it, it's like ada flexibility lah. Kan, flexibility dari waktu bekerja, tempat bekerja, masa untuk memulakan atau tamat bekerja. Some of these like simple things are also accommodations that help, right?
Sebenarnya ada juga syarikat sekarang ni saya dengar waktu bekerja berdasarkan pukul berapa employee tu masuk. So for example, because with traffic and all that, sekiranya say masuk pukul 8, you go back at 6. Come in at 9, you go back at 5, for example. So the earlier you come in, the earlier you go back. The later you come in, the later you go back. So
rather than semua orang kena masuk pukul 9 and then punch out at like 5:30 or whatever.
Exactly.
Right?
Janji you are here from this certain hours of the day and you fulfill your 8 working hours in a day.
Of course, I think antara yang wajar kita sebut ialah satu, kita mengambil langkah-langkah untuk mengadakan penyesuaian seperti ini, sama ada secara fizikal ataupun sama ada dari segi company policy lah kan, for HR to make this kind of decisions. Tapi lepas kita ambil keputusan ni, kita juga perlu melihat kepada sedikit sebanyak kena adalah training atau taklimat untuk semua orang yang bekerja, selain daripada orang yang memerlukan penyesuaian, right? So everybody has to understand kenapa tiba-tiba ada this quiet area, or why are we changing the lighting here, things like that. I think that sort of training and awareness masih perlu taklimat, dan untuk supaya kita boleh sampai pada satu tahap bila kita kata kita telah membudayakan semangat inklusif, right? So that goes without saying lah. That is also something you need to do to have the awareness that we are trying to be more inclusive, right? We are trying to make some of these accommodations and changes at our workplace. So that we can have, more diversity in another way.
Yeah. Right? And I want to say, I want to speak about this because among the neurodiversity that we see is Tourette's.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
Tourette's
So
syndrome.
that's also a hidden disability. So Tourette's syndrome ni berlainan sebab kadang-kadang seseorang itu mempunyai tics, it's involuntary movement ataupun
pergerakan yang tak dapat dikawal.
Dan kadang-kadang pergerakan itu termasuklah jerit ataupun mengeluarkan perkataan. Itu pun ada juga. Dan bukan sahaja physical movement tetapi melibatkan pertuturan. So I remember going for one meeting where we were all sitting down and I think there were only 3 of us external members, and the rest were from within the organization. And when one of the members actually had Tourette's, and I think that was the first time I had heard of Tourette's.
Okay.
Because saya tak pernah berjumpa dengan sesiapa yang mempunyai Tourette's syndrome.
Okay.
Dan
But you were informed?
I was not informed because saya sedar bahawa within the organisation mereka dah membudayakan the acceptance sampai for them it was no big deal. They didn't need to tell anybody. But during the meeting at one point, I think we were discussing something a bit stressful, and the tick happened, and there was a sudden burst of a speech. And the 3 of us external got a bit taken aback. But the way the rest of them handled it was amazing. They just said, "Oh, by the way, that happens. Don't mind her. She has Tourette's. Shall we continue?" It was as though it
No big deal
didn't
lah.
matter.
No big deal.
Yeah. right?
Tak apalah.
Tak apalah. So it took the rest of, the
Okay.
external attendees a bit of time to say, oh, okay. But sebab semua orang dah macam rasa, no big deal, let's continue. Kita pun turut. Tetapi at the end of the meeting, bila saya balik, saya menyiasat apa itu Tourette syndrome sebab saya pun tak tahu.
Belum pernah dengar kan?
Yeah.
Belum pernah
But it
dengar.
was
Okay.
just the way it was handled because
Right.
everybody in the organisation was like, no, she's an essential member. It just happens. Let's continue.
So that is budaya lah, culture
That's
kan,
budaya.
budaya. Maknanya penerimaan tu dah macam sangat biasa kan, tak menjadi masalah, and then it was just very quick explanation kan. Dia tak adalah macam, okay, sekarang ni kita akan membuat satu presentation tentang tu. tak ada pun kan. And then because you were told to teruskan
Carry on.
meeting,
Yes.
memang teruskan meeting lah. Tak ada masalah lah lepas tu. It was okay.
It was okay.
Yeah. Okay, see? So it again, it's your approach and mindset. Just these things lah. Sometimes it can make a difference. Yeah.
It came across like she was such an essential member that it was just a done thing. So much so
That's
that
fine.
I think the rest of us who reacted dengan rasa kaget tu were made to feel like, oh, it's okay. And don't be afraid. It's nothing. So much so, even if you felt a little bit apprehensive, you had to sit back and just accept it because everybody else was.
Right. I like that actually. Okay, let's take a break and then kita akan kembali semula di segmen yang kedua. Hai, selamat kembali ke segmen kedua dalam episod 27 kita Family Podcast. Kami akan teruskan perbincangan tentang penyesuaian di tempat-tempat kerja ya untuk mereka yang neurodivergent dan OKU. I think pada segmen pertama kita dah sebut tentang beberapa cara atau perkara yang harus difikirkan untuk mana-mana majikan ingin mencuba untuk menyediakan satu suasana peluang yang lebih inklusif lah untuk kalau mereka ingin create the kind of opportunity untuk pekerjaan yang membuka jawatan untuk mereka yang neurodivergent. So I think to be fair, kita dah sebut antara perkara yang bunyi je agak straightforward dan mudah, tapi perlu juga kita sebut tentang realiti-realiti tertentu. Mengapa agaknya masih belum dibiasakan penyesuaian di tempat-tempat kerja dan masih belum kita melihat suatu peningkatan atau jumlah yang bermakna dari segi mereka yang neurodivergent atau OKU mendapat peluang pekerjaan, right? So the reality is that memang masih ada banyak kekangan. Ya. Satu, sudah tentu dari segi kesedaran dan mindset. So of course that is related to cara berfikir, budaya, things like this. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit. How do we deal with that situation? Like maybe what are some of the problems, but also apakah cara untuk menghadapi dan menangani situasi atau masalah seperti ini kalau kita masih, insyaAllah masih ya, atau benar-benar ingin memwujudkan suatu suasana pekerjaan yang betul-betul inklusif, right? Let's start talking about what are the options maybe for bigger employers or big companies. It's not going to be as simple as buying a tent.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. So katalah kita tahu sekarang ada dan memang I'm so happy to hear antara berita tentang syarikat dan organisasi besar yang telah memulakan inisiatif mengadakan pekerjaan for a lot of neurodivergence and things like that, includes banks, includes GLCs, Here in Malaysia, right? How did that happen for them?
I think it was just the will of somebody in HR, but there are two sides of the coin. Firstly, in Malaysia, we do not have job seekers discrimination law. So kalau seseorang itu ingin memohon pekerjaan di mana-mana organisasi dan memang memberi deklarasi bahawa dia mempunyai status OKU ataupun
ada diagnosis
tertentu, mereka mungkin tidak akan dipertimbangkan, permohonan mereka tidak akan dipertimbangkan dan mereka mungkin tidak akan mendapat pekerjaan itu. Dan bukan kerana mereka tidak layak dari mana-mana segi yang lain, tetapi hanya kerana mereka telah berterus terang. So that is one that as a lawyer I see to be very rampant. And that's also because dalam akta pekerjaan di Malaysia memang tiada apa-apa section yang menghalang job seekers discrimination juga.
How about Akta OKU?
Akta OKU pun tidak menggunakan, memang menggalakkan pekerjaan oleh OKU tetapi tidak menggunakan perkataan penyesuaian munasabah seperti dalam konteks
education.
Okay.
Pendidikan. Tak sama.
So, Section 28 seperti yang Desiree telah sebut dalam episod 25 adalah section hanya satu section dalam Akta OKU yang mempunyai reasonable accommodation.
So this is what prevents a lot of companies, big or small, from even wanting to hire lah and open the door, because in a sense it's like leceh lah, tak payahlah kan, or tak perlu kita, sebab kalau kita tak buat pun tak ada masalah. That's one thing. Okay.
Because
So
a lot of them have this diversity policy now.
Okay, so now that's getting back to what I wanted to ask.
Yeah, diversity, equity and inclusion.
Yes. Yeah, there DEIJ, there's the justice component. Okay, so let's get back to the question that I had thrown out there. So let's say they do want to do it, then how does it happen? How do they get help to make that happen?
Well, sekarang di Malaysia ni ada beberapa syarikat, sebenarnya bukan saja NGO tetapi ada juga syarikat-syarikat yang memberi perkhidmatan tersebut. Ya, so kepada syarikat-syarikat yang besar, maybe they have more budget for it, boleh consider spaces seperti Employable. Employable is a private entity di mana mereka bukan saja membuat job coaching and job training untuk mereka yang neurodivergent, tetapi
yang mencari
pekerjaan,
but is also for
employer support.
Okay.
Begitu juga dengan NGO United Voice, right? They are an NGO, so they help them job train them, job coach them and find employment and support the employers. Dan begitu juga Oasis Place. Yeah, so Oasis Place more towards saya rasa more towards preparing the employers. Kan?
Gamuda. Gamuda's Enabling Academy.
Yes, Gamuda Enabling Academy also is a very special place, tetapi kita kena ingat they are khusus untuk autistic level 1 sahaja. Buat masa sekarang hanya untuk autistic level 1 dan antara sebabnya ialah to get them into offices rather than sebab the level 1.
So not just yang manual labor and then untuk yang kemahiran yang agak rendah lah. So just to remind everybody that just because you are OKU, you know, doesn't mean that there is like, I think you've said in an episode before, doesn't mean there's an intellectual disability. You know, doesn't mean that there's not a person who is highly educated, technical skills and all that sekali kan.
So on that note, if you are looking at the technical part of job coaching, job training, one very essential part is job matching. Kan? So apabila seseorang itu seorang neurodivergent, dia dapat perkhidmatan daripada job coach, the first thing job coach akan buat ialah job matching. Based on what Anik terangkan tadi, actually when we first started, is matching the skill and the talent or the abilities to the job they can do. Only then they coach, they find the opportunity And throughout the coaching, also typically the employer gets supported along the way, dan it is also recommended bila seseorang itu telah mendapat jawatan to have a buddy system within the company. So meaning the candidate gets trained, the employer gets trained, and the people around get an awareness, and between the people around there'll be someone to help be their buddy.
Right. So these are, so di Malaysia sekarang ni pun dah ada official proper consultants, training and all that for the purposes of making your company more inclusive.
Yes.
And expanding your diversity policy lah, for example.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
So it's just we're talking about the will. Maknanya keinginan, hasrat, kalau dah ada niat dan boleh saja, dan memang ada mereka yang mempunyai keupayaan untuk membantu company yang like lebih besar and all that lah. So that means we don't really have to have like bergantung pada international consultant sebagai contoh, and
Yes.
so in Malaysia pun dah ada.
Memang
Betul.
Dah ada.
But
Okay.
in the end, it ends up being a human issue. Kalau ada with most neurodivergence, I feel that if there is satu orang dalam organisasi itu dan yang faham
Yes.
apa yang diperlukan
Mhm.
dan boleh menjadi buddy ataupun membimbing secara senyap or guide when necessary seseorang yang mempunyai keperluan untuk reasonable accommodation itu akan berjaya, dan it is giving them the chance to thrive. Because there are some jobs that we know are very inflexible. Even when they are advertised, it would be like, the ability to work alone independently. And if somebody who is neurodivergent is not able to do that, there has to be that dialogue to say, I need support.
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Right? And when that dialogue happens and I need support is thrown out there, if someone says, yes, we are able to give you the support, tell us what you need, that becomes a step forward, because a lot of times they'll say, oh no, if you need support, this is not the job for you.
Right.
But there's also the opposite side of the job requirement that says must be a team player.
Yes.
But at the same time, working in teams.
Okay, so let's talk about culture,
Right,
right? So
yeah.
kadang-kadang is not, bukan dari segi dasar sesebuah syarikat, company or whatever, itu yang bukan menjadi kekurangan, tetapi tadi masa kita sebut budaya lah kan,
Yeah,
budaya dekat tempat bekerja ni ada macam-macam. So let's talk a little bit about that. Sometimes that is the one that is the problem.
Yes.
Right, that prevents seseorang yang neurodivergent, dia tidak dapat menyesuaikan diri atau melakukan pekerjaannya dengan baik, dan datang ke kerja dan dapat bekerja because of things like this, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So things like socializing kan, after hour socializing, sekiranya seseorang tu neurodivergent, maybe socializing might not be their strong suit. Kan? And even for us neurotypicals kan, some of us
We don't want to go out for those team
No.
dinners.
pukul 8 I want to be home and in bed. Yeah. Tetapi there is this unspoken rule, if you don't go, you're not a team player. So
And also kadang-kadang it's this like that work culture kan, the work hours are over, tapi sebab they continue to spend time together, tapi kat situlah tiba-tiba ada like meeting.
Yes.
Ada
Unofficial
perbincangan tentang kerja-kerja tertentu, whatever.
Brainstorming.
So siapa yang tak datang tu, sorry lah, macam you are not part of that discussion. Walhal di luar
di luar waktu
tempat
bekerja.
kerja, di
Dan
luar
waktu
waktu bekerja, things like this. And then of course there's that understanding that macam tak pandai, sebagai contoh, ada expectation tak pandai nak jaga hati bos. So that sort of culture, I think, well, not just for OKU lah, but for OKU we are bringing it up kerana ada antara neurodivergent yang memang dari segi aspek social communication kan, and we've talked that before in several different episodes. Inilah antara cabaran yang mereka hadapi. So for any individual at work, but especially for the neurodivergent, this kind of work culture is hard.
Yes.
What is also hard is executive functioning. Sebab kalau mereka tidak semasa kita bekerja, memang ada masa-masa yang memang deadlines tu berlambak. Tiba-tiba je bertimbun. And that's when they crack. Sebab tak tahu macam mana nak prioritize, tak tahu nak minta pertolongan untuk dapat extension ke. Then there is it's like a recipe for disaster. So that can also happen.
Also, that sometimes the challenge in not the unexpected, right? So dalam sesuatu pekerjaan, even dalam office, if we have XYZ to do in a day, tiba-tiba there'll be ABC coming in from somewhere else. So these are things that can be challenging to manage, especially those who have executive functioning challenges. Time management, prioritizing.
So it sounds like the job should ideally be straightforward, kan? And predictable. So these are the things that employers need to take into consideration lah. Right?
Again, okay, so now I'm going back a little bit on what I said. It still has to be reasonable, kan? It still has to be reasonable. So katakanlah ada XYZ yang seseorang perlu buat. So if there is something really urgent, katakanlah the boss needs it done now. Find a way to have that conversation that in a way it doesn't overwhelm the person. Kan? Ada juga cara budi bicara, not just here, I want this now. I mean, even with a neurotypical person, it might not be the right way to go, right? So have that proper conversation with them.
Actually, there was one accommodation maybe we didn't mention in segment 1, which is that opportunity to communicate at work. Mungkin tak semua orang selesa untuk berhadapan dengan seseorang dan mengadakan perbincangan secara terbuka. So kalau boleh diberi kelonggaran sebagai contoh untuk just communicate in writing. Right? In email, in text or something like that. Dan sekarang ni, our messaging, WhatsApp. And then sometimes there are these internal messaging things for companies of a certain size kan, so that kalau katalah itu antara cara yang boleh diterima, that is one of the penyesuaian that we can expect to also happen, right? I was just wondering, what do you think of this situation where people say susah je nak buat benda ni semua, right? So why should we make the effort to be more inclusive at work? Why should we want to make the effort to make sure dalam team kita, dalam organisasi kita ada kehadiran seorang OKU, ada antara team member kita yang neurodivergent and all that. So what?
Sebab everybody is unique and mereka akan membawa keistimewaan sendiri kepada team itu sekiranya diberi peluang.
Okay.
And ultimately, if we want to embrace diversity, it's not just gender or ethnicity. And this is why we are here in Kita Family. We also want it to be neurodiversity that is embraced. So it is a broader sense to say we appreciate everybody and we appreciate individuals that can bring their skill to the table, which may not be anything supernatural, but they are just an essential team member. It is to make anybody feel that they belong and are part of an organization.
Ezrin?
I'm going to say that neurodivergents have always been in the workplace undiagnosed or those who are not open enough about it for fear of discrimination or being misunderstood, right? So I think number one, they've always been in our midst, right? But now I think having that conscious effort to want to include, to encourage the honesty, right? And at the end of the day, ramai orang are sekarang ni, you have a loved one or a family member who is neurodivergent.
Yes.
Right? I think it's more common than we realize. And, I'm just going to give an example of women in the workplace as well. Look, 40, 50 years ago, we were fighting to be in that CEO's office.
Even 20 years
right?
ago.
We were fighting for equal pay.
Yes.
Right? We were fighting for maternity leave and not losing our positions when we come back from maternity leave. Right? So this is the next, and in every generation, we see a certain fight for the disadvantaged people or communities, right? And to quote Nori, neurodivergence is that next level and group that we want to include.
Yeah. Especially for Malaysia, right?
Especially for
Malaysia.
Yes.
Kita dah biasa dengan penerimaan, kepelbagaian.
Exactly.
Ya, memang. Kita
Can
dah
I
biasa
just share that
memandangkan
20 years ago,
kekuatan.
as women lawyers, we only could wear skirts to court.
You're not allowed to wear pants?
Yeah, we weren't, and
Oh,
it,
wow.
it changed. It changed about 23, 24 years ago.
Very
And a circular-
recent.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
for the first 2 years of my working life, it was always skirts. And I was so happy the day I could wear trousers to court.
This is why I think probably didn't become a lawyer.
No, it was that difficult.
Yeah.
Especially when we carry bags and balance things.
Yes.
Alamak, nak bawa handbag. Lepas tu, sekarang ni laptop. Dulu tak ada laptop. Tapi bag
Documents,
berat.
Documents lagi
They
banyak,
actually
lagi
bring
berat daripada
lagi
laptop.
berat.
volumes of, the acts and the laws and whatnot, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So we've come a long way, but now
we still have
to take,
some way to go.
No, it's the next step, as Nori says.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's embrace neurodiversity in the workplace.
Yeah, look,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of data out there. Okay, like honestly, kalau kita tak kita tak membuka perbincangan tentang topik ni pun, kalau kita nak mencari sumber-sumber online pun banyak.
Betul.
Just to open
Yes.
and see reference points. There's so many things about how to get started with making your workplace more inclusive. There are manuals that can be printed out for purposes of HR, and training and things like that can definitely be done. So, I always like bila kita ada peluang untuk merujuk kepada sesuatu yang pernah kita kita dah lakukan, kita pernah mengalami. It's true. Dulu orang perempuan pun tak ada tempat di tempat kerja, di organisasi atau tempat-tempat kerja tertentu, right? And sekarang ni kita tak boleh nak bayangkan. Macam mana kita memang dah tak boleh nak bayangkan kalau tak ada wanita.
Yep.
Di
Datuk Bandar Kuala
tempat
Lumpur pun
bekerja.
sekarang seorang wanita.
So it's like, we hope and we are looking forward to a future where there are neurodivergence and it is accepted and normal and no big deal, just like
the story Anik told.
the story that you told of the person you met in the meeting who had Tourette's, and that they have a presence that is embraced and appreciated and celebrated, right? Very much welcome, not just they happen to be around and they have to be accommodated, all that. And then we get to a point where sebenarnya benda ni akan jadi biasa, insyaAllah. Jadi mudah, tak ada masalah pun. Kita pernah melakukannya.
Dan kita
akan cuba dan boleh juga melakukannya untuk warga OKU dan neurodivergent, right?
dan berusaha sehingga kita mencapai maklumat
Yes,
itu.
definitely. That's like, I think, the role that people like us want to play. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I think we're good for this week.
Yes.
There will be some maybe further issues that kita akan mungkin dapat mengupas secara lebih khusus dan teliti lah. For example, I think the topic of discrimination is something we can talk about more at another time, and also other specific aspects of work. But yeah, seriously, at this moment, boleh start, kalau nak start dengan Google pun.
Hmm.
Benefits of diversity at work, the things that you can do. Why now neurodivergence is also another thing that has benefited, again, the different ways of thinking,
Yeah.
the richness to the culture of your company. So many things can be done. So we want to start off with that positive first,
Absolutely.
right?
Yes.
Okay, so until we see you next time, our usual reminder, please like, follow, subscribe, comment on all our social media platforms. Of course, the full episodes right here on YouTube and Spotify, but also we have Instagram and Facebook and TikTok. And we hope to get your feedback there also. We'll see you there. Jumpa lagi pada episod yang akan datang. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum.
Bye.